Here are your hosts, Kyle, Fellows, and Andrew Mertig. This is the Draft Fellows Podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 12 of the Draft Fellows Podcast. I am Andrew Mertig. This is Kyle Fellows, and together we are the Draft Fellows. That kind of sounds like a Captain Planet intro. I don't know if you know what that is, Kyle. But make sure you check us out on YouTube or check out the audio version on your favorite podcasting platform. Today is our second part of the NFC South draft review. If you want to check out the other divisions we've covered, please follow the channel or the audio podcast. Kyle, how are you feeling?
I'm doing really good. I am excited to finish up this NFC South conversation with you. We get Saints today. We get Bucks today. So really interesting draft classes that they were able to haul this year. And I'm excited to talk about it.
Awesome. Well, let's get right into it. And first up, I failed there miserably, Kyle.
There we go.
The wrong buttons.
We're back.
There we go.
We got the Saints.
Sorry, audio folks. We're going to start with the Saints. In the first round, they take Talise Fuaga, the offensive lineman out of Oregon State. In the second round, they get cornerback Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama. Then they don't pick until the fifth round, but they did have three selections there. Quarterback Spencer Rattler, wide receiver Bub Means, all name team for sure. Linebacker Jalen Ford, and then the sixth round, they bounced back with defensive lineman Christian Boyd, and in the seventh round, they wrapped things up with offensive tackle Josiah Ezrim. Kyle, you want to talk about Josiah Ezrim?
I do. Let's start right with my favorite Eastern Kentucky offensive tackle. I need your thoughts first because I didn't watch him. Let's start with a different offensive tackle we've heard of. Let's talk about Talise Fuaga. And this, I really liked Fuaga quite a bit. And he's my offensive tackle 3 in this class. Spent 2 years on the right side at Oregon State. This is a player super interesting because I put in my notes, like, this is someone who probably does stay at right tackle in the NFL. If he fails at tackle, he's going to be an impact guard, but rock solid, going to be a player who you can start and rely on for the next 10 years. Super fascinating that it certainly sounds like the Saints want to try him at left tackle before they do anything else. So he's going to start at the left side. I think their goal is to put Trevor Penning over on the right side, if that will work. And so kind of work through their options there at tackle. But really good player, a technically sound player in pass protection, aggressive nature in the run game. So hands are better than feet. Like, his feet are the one thing that you probably want to see improve, and maybe what kind of made you go, maybe he's not a left tackle, but explosive player off the line. And if you look at his PFF grades, some of the best grades that they've given to an offensive tackle over the last couple of years. So really interesting to see what the Saints do with him, if they leave him there at their left side or if they put him back at the right. But I think they got a good player here in the first round.
Yeah, I loved him. Super powerful guy. He's going to be a mover in the run game, and I think the Saints will really appreciate that. I think, in pass pro, he can be a vice grip kind of guy if he gets his footwork right. And you're spot on there. That was the big thing I saw. His footwork gets really sloppy. Sometimes he's just too over aggressive. Like, that aggressiveness is great in the run game, but sometimes he just needs to settle down and let the pass rusher come to him and use those natural skills that he has, right? Like the huge length, the great strength. Like, let that work to your advantage. You don't always have to go wreck somebody. So yeah, I mean, I thought right tackle was maybe a little bit safer for him, but I can see what the Saints see. And if they can correct that footwork, he's got all of the tools to be a really good left tackle.
Absolutely. So in the second round, they moved to take a corner, Kool-Aid McKinstry out of Alabama, who was thought to, I think at one point, go quite a bit higher than this. They took him at 41. This was my cornerback 3. I loved McKinstry. I thought he was a value in the 20s. And I think in this process, when Terrion Arnold ascends, and I think he did have the turf toe injury, or maybe it was another foot injury that held him back throughout the process. Maybe that's what makes a player like this slip. But I thought that Kool-Aid McKinstry was one of the more well-rounded corner prospects in this draft. Like, you'd like to see him capitalize and make some more plays on the ball when he has those opportunities. And I think that plays like the one sideline catch that Adonai Mitchell had over him, like, maybe stuck in people's minds a little bit. But all in all, like, Terrion Arnold was a really good player for Alabama, but I thought Kool-Aid McKinstry was right there with him as another incredible talent coming out of Bama this year. So to get him at 41, I felt like it was a pretty good steal for the Saints.
Yeah, I had him as my 45th overall player. He goes 41. So of course I know what I'm talking about, and Kyle doesn't. The NFL agrees all over the board. But
yes.
in all seriousness, like, McKinstry was a fun guy to watch because it was like, is this guy really fast or is he not? I can't tell, because he kind of glides across the field. Like, he has such an effortless gait. And I really enjoyed watching that. I thought good ball skills, good athleticism. He's really sticky in man coverage. I thought his zone coverage could use a little work. He can be a really physical player. I thought his jamming was excellent. I think he's a really good tackler. And I did question his top end speed on tape because there were a couple times he got beat over the top. You mentioned that a little bit. And I think he can sometimes get panicky in those situations. But it is interesting, right? Like, nobody liked Paulson Adebo as much as I did. And I think Kool-Aid McKinstry actually has a lot of things in common with Paulson Adebo.
Interesting.
And so it's going to be interesting to see those two, as a tandem in New Orleans.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting name. I hadn't thought about that comp, but I also liked Paulson Adebo a good bit. So that's fun that he goes to the same team there in New Orleans. They took a break here. They went out and got some snacks and went back to the hotel. But then on day 3 of the 100%, lots of beignets. Round 5 though, they came back and they made some picks here, and
they take
Spencer Rattler.
Quarterbacks. Yeah, I wanted to talk about Rattler a little bit when I'm not talking about beignets. I liked Rattler a lot. Yeah,
I got distracted when you said beignets.
Rattler was the number 1 recruit in the country, right? And then he goes to Oklahoma, and there's the Caleb Williams stuff. And, I heard he fell a lot because of the high school documentary and some questions about his personality. And I don't know, right? Like, never talked to the guy, but I can tell you from what I saw on tape, I was really impressed. I had him at 84 overall. And I can tell you, when people come in with like really, really high expectations, it is so difficult when they don't reach those expectations very quickly. Like, that's got to be incredibly hard on a young man, and, having to transfer. But he lands in South Carolina. Seems like he took that the right way, and he really worked. And you could see progression throughout his time there. I thought he was really, really good last year. I like what he has to provide as a really like high upside developmental pick who, he could be out of the league, right? In a few years. We don't know. But I think if you're going to take the risk on a 5th round quarterback, give me that crazy upside and somebody who has a ton of college experience over some of the like higher risk kind of players that you typically see go in the 5th round.
Yeah, it's interesting. This was their first pick in the latter portions of the draft, right? Like, they had that long drought. They come back. You kind of wonder, would they have taken this player even earlier if they had a pick, prior to 150, just the way that things fell. But you mentioned it, like, the arm talent is certainly there. Accuracy, I felt like was okay. I wasn't wowed by the ball placement sometimes, and the decision-making has to improve. But, I mean, you talked about, like, he's a player who could be out of the league in a couple of years. He could also be a player who's starting by mid-season, because, like, the Derek Carr situation is, like, I don't know, like, unstable. Like, the contract suggests that he's going to be the guy, but I think we've seen enough Derek Carr to know, like, the Saints know that, like, the ceiling there is a little bit limited. So you could totally see them making a decision and saying, hey, we're going to go with the young guy, and maybe Rattler gets an opportunity sooner than later.
Yeah, I think in the right offense. I mean, I really like the way that Spencer Rattler like layered the ball in. I think he has a nice finesse, nice touch to his throws that is maybe not NFL ready, but like I think that is a trait that he can rely on. I think he's got enough arm strength to get the ball where he needs to go. He's a decent athlete, like, he's 6'1", so of course you'd like him to be like a super athlete to kind of make up for some of that stuff. And he's not quite that, but I do think that there's enough tools there that you can kind of get excited about what he could potentially be with a year or two of development. And, you hope that realistically he can be a solid backup, and then maybe he surprises you and can be a spot starter or develop into a pretty solid player in the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. They had a couple more picks here at the end of this class. Christian Boyd is an interesting player, someone from Northern Iowa, small program, was not invited to the combine. And so I think that's interesting. He put up 38 bench on the 38 bench on the reps, 38 reps on the bench, I think at his pro day. So powerful player, strong player, team captain there at Northern Iowa. So in a place where like you're taking long shots, like take a shot on the guy from Northern Iowa who might actually pan out and be, an impactful player along the defensive line. But we got to flip over to the Bucs because we are running short on time. Andrew, anything else here on this Saints class before we get out of here?
I was just gonna say, I think Jalen Ford was a really good value in the 5th round. I think he's a fun upside developmental linebacker prospect there for them as well. But yeah, let's switch over to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And in the 1st round, they grabbed interior offensive lineman or tackle. We don't know. He's just labeled as offensive lineman. Graham Barton out of Duke. In the 2nd round, they get edge Chris Braswell out of Alabama. In the 3rd, safety Tyke Smith out of Georgia. A 2nd, 3rd round pick, wide receiver Jalen McMillan out of Washington. In the 4th, they get running back Bucky Irvin out of Oregon. In the 6th round, guard Elijah Klein. And 7th round, tight end Devin Culp.
Yeah, Graham Barton, man, I love Graham Barton, and I think that they got a really good player here. This is one of those guys that he can start along your offensive line in lots of different places. You mentioned like maybe he's a tackle, but he's probably going to play on the inside. Tenacity was the word that I wrote throughout his profile. Just a player who's going to give you his best effort on every play and be a real go-getter, dominant in the run game, great athlete, like perfect in opportunities where he gets to get out in space and create a little bit further down the field and those kinds of things. So probably an interior player, can bounce out the tackle if you need him to, though. And at 26, like I felt like this was a home run pick for them.
Yeah, I had him as 31st overall, so like right in the neighborhood of where I thought he would go. But I did grade him as a tackle. So as an interior offensive lineman, I would have knocked that down a little bit. So I was not as high on Barton as some. But I do definitely see like, in certain schemes, he's going to be a really phenomenal mover. He's got a lot of tools, tons of versatility. I think you could probably play him at 4 of the 5 spots on the offensive line, maybe 5 out of 5. And so like, for an upside pick, I think, this is going to be a really, really high floor kind of player. Mm-hmm. Maybe the ceiling isn't quite as high as some players you see, but if you throw him out there at tackle and he sticks, then the sky's the limit because he's such a good mover. He's such a intelligent player. He takes good angles. He knows how to deal with pass rush counters. I think, this is a player that I think is going to have a long career in Tampa.
Yeah, so Chris Braswell in the 2nd round, maybe the least exciting edge rusher to really talk about. Like, no one's talking about Chris Braswell. Like, he didn't get a lot of buzz. But for me, as someone who dug into the edge class quite a bit, like, he was one of the guys who's like, he's just not bad at anything. Like, he's a good run defender. He pushes the pocket really well. I did write he's a stiff player. There's a stiffness to his game that's very different than when you're watching someone like Dallas Turner or someone like that, obviously. But really a very well-rounded player that I could just see having an 8 to 10 year career in the NFL. Maybe he starts, maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's like that 3rd rotational edge rusher for you. But I feel like a really well-rounded prospect who probably has a long career in the NFL coming out of Alabama.
Yeah, I actually really liked Braswell. I had him at 40 overall amongst all prospects. And to me, it was like, this is a guy who is super well built, incredibly powerful for an edge. He also has a really nice first step. And I agree with you. There's a lack of bend, and there's I felt like on tape he had short arms. And so that combination, it's going to limit how good you can be. But I think the floor here is super safe. You're going to have a guy who's going to be really, really solid against a run from day one. And I think his speed to power is going to allow him to be a third down pass rush threat as well. Maybe not immediately, but eventually in the career. And so I mean, this is the kind of edge. He's not flashy at all. And then in 5 years, you're going to be like, how did they get him at the end of the second round? Like, he is a really, really productive pass rusher. And so, I like what they did there.
Yeah, one more thing on him. I noted that like he's a smart player in that he learns the tendencies of his offensive opponents on the offensive line, and he gets better as the game wears on. So as he learns those tendencies, you see him making splash plays in the third and fourth quarter because he's learned how to beat those guys. And so I feel like that shows a lot of maturity and shows really an advanced, technique to be able to do that as a college player. And so I appreciated that about him. But some other really interesting picks here: Tyke Smith, Jalen McMillan, both in the third round. McMillan, for me, was one of my favorite wide receivers in this class. He was my wide receiver 9. And in this class, like, that's high praise because of how many guys were stacked up here that probably were worthy of that grade. But for me, this is a player that like is probably quicker than fast, but it's still a fast enough player. For me, this is high praise because we're 1 year removed from this player. But to me, there was some JSN, Jackson Smith and Jigba vibes to Jalen McMillan. Obviously, this is a discounted version that you get in the third round. But McMillan had a tremendous 2022 season and spent his 2023 season a little bit banged up. So this is a total possibility that he could come in and be an impact player. There's buzz in Bucs camp that he may already be in 3 wide receiver sets and ready to make an impact as a rookie. So I like what they got here in the third round in McMillan.
Yeah, and Tyke Smith, the safety out of Georgia, I thought like really good run defender. He can play in the nickel. He has good takeaway production, which is interesting because I thought he struggled at the catch point a little bit. Like, instinctively, if he was there and the ball was there and he didn't have to deal with a lot, like, he was good at taking the ball away. And that in and of itself is a tool. He lacked length. And so I think at the catch point, he struggled a little bit. That makes me question, like, is he a box safety? Is he going to be able to like play more of a dedicated nickel role? It's interesting. I think, there's some tools here to be excited about. But 89, I thought was a little high for him, but I think, in this safety class, he was one of the higher safeties.
Yeah, so there's one more player in this class that we have to talk about. And if we had the drop right now, we would probably play Whitney Houston's I Will Always Love You for Bucky Irving, because Andrew and I will always love Bucky Irving. I think he started the process as possibly both of our RB1s, maybe. I know he was my RB1 to start. And then, Andrew, things just did not go the way that they should have. And his testing was relatively horrific and just continued to fall down the boards. He landed as my RB3 just because I loved his film. I do think he's going to be a limited role player. He's probably not going to be the guy that you give 20 carries to every game, but I think he's still going to be very good at what an offense asks you to do. But I just couldn't have him any higher than RB3 because of that testing. But I know he fell a little bit further than that for you at the end of the day.
Yeah, and so I don't know how many people are listening to this that have never heard us before, but I have a algorithm. So I go through and I give everybody a film grade, but then there are some other factors that go into it: positional value, age, athletic testing, and those will affect players' rankings positively and negatively. And for Bucky Irving, this is how much the formula worked. This might be the most it's ever worked against a player. He started out as my RB1 based on film grade. After all was said and done, he ended up as RB9 and player 144 overall.
Wow.
So right around where it was picked, ironically. But yeah, being small and then not testing well really hurt him. from a grading standpoint. But I think like you have to take all of that with a grain of salt. And a 4th round running back is still a valuable asset, I should say. And I think with Irving, like what you see is a lot of really good short area quickness. I think the vision is outstanding. And even though he's a smaller back, he's going to be able to provide stuff in between the tackles a little bit. And I think as a pass catcher as well. And so I really, really like him as a change of pace back and taking some of the carries off of, your starter and really like working through, learning how to be a potential factor. He's somebody like, I know you and I both play a lot of dynasty leagues for fantasy football. He's somebody like I'm gobbling up as if there's a 4th round of the rookie draft or as a UDFA, like he's a player I think could be really, really fun in the not too distant future.
Yeah, Rashid White obviously there and is going to continue to be the guy until he's not. But I think that Bucky Irving is an interesting skill set. 195 pounds, kind of sunk him for me. Like for me, it's like that 200 pounds is kind of like that Mendoza line. Is that the right word? For like you worry about that
You
200 pounds. Thank you. But you prefer to be heavier than that. But I mean, we've seen Jahmyr Gibbs came in and played light, but like electric, right? And I think that was the hope for Bucky. But like 195, and then he was 195 and a 2 RAS player. And so those things just, I mean, you have to factor all that in. Like those numbers don't lie, but electric player, absolutely someone who can take it to the house, has that ability, and is just a good football player. Sometimes that's the bottom line is like this guy's going to play better than he's going to test. And you cannot watch him in Oregon and think, oh, this guy may not have it. Like this guy absolutely does. And it's just going to be interesting to see how the Bucs implement him and help him play to his strengths because he is a good football player. But anything else from the Buccaneers class that we need
I
to
just want to say
here?
if any Buccaneers fans are still around, Rashad White, we keep screwing his name
Did I say
up.
Rashid? Rashad.
I think we said it wrong in the last episode as well. So hopefully nobody caught it, but I'm sure the
So no
comments
Bucs fans
will
showed up to
be
hear this
very
one.
unforgiving.
Yeah. All right. So it's Rashad White. Respect on that name. But it's been fun. Thanks for joining us. Make sure you like and subscribe to the show, and we will continue covering each division in football over the next couple weeks. From the draft room to the gridiron, the Draft Fellows have you covered. Until next time, stay tuned and stay in the game.